This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include J. Brad Crone, political consultant, Chris Fitzsimon with NC Policy Watch, John Hood with the John Locke Foundation, and Becki Gray with Carolina Journal and the John Locke Foundation. Well, this week on NC Spin, we're going to discuss a new iteration of Medicaid reforms that seem to be taking shape, the closure of the Oregon Inlet bridge to the Outer Banks, and the influence of independent expenditure groups and the influence that they'll have on the 2014 elections. This should be a fun debate, so let's get started. Governor McCrory's Medicaid Reform Task Force held their first meeting recently and unveiled some new directions for our state's Medicaid program. While the basic thrust of the initiative proposed still appears to focus on switching from a fee-for-service to a per-member per-month approach, the group discussed a new approach of dividing the state into 6 or 7 regional networks, each having their own insurers or care provider groups to manage the care of Medicaid patients. Becki, what's your reaction to these new considerations on Medicaid?
Well, I think it's about time that we'll really start looking at this seriously. We've had a lot of problems with Medicaid for a number of years, mainly having to do with the cost overruns, unpredictability of Medicaid. The presentation that was given to this task force this week, 2 million people in North Carolina are on Medicaid. That's over 20% of our population is on Medicaid. It's the fastest growing part of our state budget. And so clearly something needs to be done. What we've seen over a number of years are cost overruns in the middle of the budget process or the middle of a fiscal year when we're talking $300-400 million in overrun. So something clearly has to be done about cost containment and some predictability so that we can budget appropriately for that and ensure that there's money for other things other than just Medicaid. So I think to go in and take a good hard look at this, to look at a lot of the possibilities, a lot of the perhaps things that they're doing in other states that are working well that we could adapt here in North Carolina. So I commend the governor certainly for setting this up, and I'm very optimistic that this is going to begin to address some of these
Brad,
cost
the governor
problems.
keeps saying that Medicaid is broken, and Becki alluded to these cost overruns. The statistics that I've seen say that we're growing by about 4.5% per year in the number of Medicaid patients, but the cost of patient care is only growing about 2.3%. These overruns don't have anything to do with patient care.
No, it doesn't. And here's the deal. We're paying back money that we had over expenditures dating all the way back in cost overruns from 2006. So we're paying the federal government back that process. The positive news that I see coming out of the Medicaid Reform Commission is that the governor has at least signaled a little bit that he's willing to deal with the House of Medicine, that he's willing to bring the House of Medicine, the pharmacy community, the physician community, and the hospital community to the table and have a real clear-cut dialogue, and that is a positive movement that I see.
John, you were on a panel with us recently, and we interviewed Representative Nelson Dollar, who is acknowledged to be the most knowledgeable person on health issues in our state legislature. He made the statement that he thought the biggest problems with Medicaid and health care were mismanagement at DHHS. I know you heard the statement. What was your reaction?
Well, that was the point that the biggest part of the Medicaid cost increases in recent years has been what Becki and Brad were talking about. The charging things they shouldn't have charged, overcharging things, so they had to pay money back to the feds. That's the point Nelson was making. The interesting thing that, and Representative Dollar is on that commission as they talked about it, and you alluded to it in the introduction. They are talking about a model different from McCrory's original model of statewide contractors, multiple contractors. They're talking about a regional approach. But they've also come to the point that McCrory had started with that they initially resisted, which is the idea of at-risk managed care as part of the solution. One of the reasons I think they had started to orient towards a regional approach is because there aren't that many players in North Carolina who have the assets that allow them to do that kind of care across the state other than the for-profit companies. But if you do regions with networks of local providers, then it becomes more realistic.
But Chris, one of the things that Nelson said to us, I mean, I kind of got the impression that he was not quite as much enthusiastic about this private managed care model as he was fixing management over at DHHS. If that is in fact the case, does it spell doom for McCrory's private managed care model over in the legislature?
Well, I still think it's going to be rough sledding over there. Representative Dollar also said at the advisory committee meeting that he has serious concerns about the regional plan. He also pointed out, as Brad had mentioned, a lot of the problems now are not the way the program is being run, the cost. It's paying back the federal government. He also said again that which I thought this was fascinating for him to say this being in the legislature. He admitted they counted on savings that weren't realistic. That was part of the reason we had cost overruns. He's a big supporter of Community Care of North Carolina, which is our not-for-profit thing. So this is a very complicated issue. I want to make one other point, which is, it was only 7 or 8 months ago, McCrory and Carol Steckel and Eldona Vosh said the solution is turn it over to for-profit out-of-state companies. That was a big solution. Well, 6 months later, it's not.
Becki, one of the things that has to factor into all of this is NC Tracks and to some extent NC Fast too.
Those are the computer systems
that manage
systems, a lot of this.
And it's created major problems. Not only are the doctors and the hospitals not getting paid, but our lawmakers clearly don't have any idea in the world what Medicaid is costing us in North Carolina, and this is kind of scary, isn't it?
It's very scary. I mean, it goes to this whole cost containment issue that they have to deal with. The NC, both of these are these websites, these computer management things for food stamps and then for the providers to be paid.
It makes sense, Tom, if you're running an insurance program that you'd have a risk department. And I mean, and clearly we've not been doing a very good job of running the Medicaid program and assessing what the general risk is. And you got to that data's available, and we ought to utilize it.
Well, it's not available right now.
That is not a new problem. This is something that has accumulated over a number of years. So this is something that Eldona Vosh and McCrory have inherited. Now, clearly there are problems over there as well. We just saw an audit this week on the NC Tracks system that is not very encouraging.
I'm sure as this unfolds, we'll be talking about it more. You can watch NC Spin anytime you want. Just go to our website, ncspin.com. Click on the YouTube button on the right side of the page. We post each week's show on Friday, so you can view us anytime you like. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. And you can follow NC Spin on Facebook and on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. So we got 4 ways you can keep the conversation going. We look forward to hearing from you. When we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about the Oregon Inlet Bridge that's closed.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
People always ask us, don't you get tired of driving to the coast every day? We have never said yes. We enjoy bringing the fresh fish to those that don't have time to drive to the coast. The relationships that we have with fishermen in eastern North Carolina are more than business to us. It's more like family. They depend on us and we depend on them. We are proud to work with North Carolina fishermen to bring fresh fish from our dock to your table.
The best part about being a member of a Touchstone Energy Cooperative is that it's your Touchstone Energy Cooperative. Learn more about the power of your co-op membership at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
The main lifeline to the Outer Banks is NC Highway 12, and the key connector is the Oregon Inlet Bridge. We've known for years this 50-year-old bridge had outlived its useful life, and a new bridge has been proposed. But a lawsuit by the Southern Environmental Law Center has delayed start of construction. Engineers recently declared the old bridge unsafe, and DOT closed it until another round of temporary repairs can shore up the current bridge. John, NC 12 is probably the most expensive stretch of road our state maintains, since there are frequent storms that cause washouts and sand that closes it. Is it time our state considered perhaps some alternative ways to move the residents, business, and tourist traffic along our Outer Banks?
Tom, this is one of those issues that's not very much fun to talk about because there is no good solution to the problem. The problem is that we have had over the course of decades, people live, recreate, and develop some very low-lying areas. The bridge is very expensive to replace no matter what you do. But unless you're going to simply abandon Hatteras and the Outer Banks to the elements, and there are some people who actually argue that's what you should do, but that's pretty unrealistic given the number of people who use it in its current form and own property there. You're either going to replace the bridge they've got at a fairly high cost, or run this ginormous, largest bridge in North America sort of solution that others are proposing. Neither one of them is a very attractive alternative.
Or ferries.
Because, frankly, the long, giant bridge will never be built, and everybody understands that.
All right.
So you've either got the shorter bridge that might not last another 30 or 40 years in the future, or you've got ferries which don't solve the problem.
Chris, let's talk about that Southern Environmental Law Center lawsuit. They've been holding this project up since it was first approved in 2011. DOT Secretary Tony Tata said this week it was a frivolous lawsuit and called on them to drop it. They came back and said they weren't. Why hadn't the state been able to get together?
He also complained that they were sitting in air-conditioned offices in Chapel Hill. As far as I know, DOT is air-conditioned, as is the governor's office, as is the studio. I thought that was a little weird. But here's the real issue is this bridge would have been built in 2006. The state and federal officials had agreed to build the long bridge in 2006.
And Mark Masnight was president.
Right, and the Dare County Commissioners decided not to do it. That bridge would have already been built. The allegation that the bridge is far too expensive to build the long bridge. There have been two different estimates, vastly different from the Department of Transportation that Tata now leads. And the final point is, if you build the short bridge, which they want to do, which may be in violation of federal law, that's what the lawsuit is about, you still have Highway 12, which, as you mentioned, washes out over and over and over and over. So this does not cut the expense at all. You build a fairly expensive bridge instead of a more expensive bridge, but you have a road that's continuously gives us problems. I was down there not long after the hurricane this summer. They had all sorts of temporary bridges. Some of the road was still unpassable. This is going to happen with every big storm for the foreseeable future until we have a long-term solution, which is the long bridge. It seems pretty clear that that's the answer. We just don't want to pay for it.
All right, Becki. So, following Chris's argument here, we've got ferries running back and forth right now, taking people. Why not just expand the ferry service?
The ferry service doesn't seem to be very efficient. It doesn't seem to be very timely for people that are trying to get to work and get back to work. So the ferry ride is a couple hours, I think I read today, 2.5 hours. And so, I mean, as far as
it's
efficiency,
a little bit of a drive down there, too, if you've ever driven that road.
Well, but it just seems, and then you were dependent on somebody else's schedule with the ferry, and most people that live in North Carolina like to have their own automobiles and their own schedules. So the ferry does not seems to me to be a temporary solution that they're using now, but certainly not. And when you're competing for tourism dollars, which that part of the state does with other states as well, when you're competing with tourism dollars, that's a real factor that people will take into consideration when deciding where to spend their money.
We got this lawsuit that's continuing. The Southern Environmental Lawsuiters said they're not going to drop it. We got the bridge closed. What's going to happen here?
You're going to have the polar ice cap melt, and it's not going to be an issue. Greenville is going to be the new water line for the East Coast.
Do you have investments in Greenville?
Of the 15 years we've been doing NC-SPEN, that's probably the most out-of-the-box answer I think we've ever got.
You just spent a lot of money on your place down at Oriental in Pamlico County to raise it up. How many feet?
6 feet.
Yeah, 6 feet. Yeah. So we got to be ready for the water.
So how's this case going to be solved? Very quickly.
I think you'll build the short bridge.
I think so too.
I think you'll build a short bridge.
I do want to make one quick comment. I wish Governor McCrory, instead of being so confrontational and really over the top nasty, had said, we need to solve this problem. Why don't we talk about it and invite people in? Instead, he went on and on to make a media stunt out of it. That didn't help anything.
All right.
I do think this is a good illustration of how important infrastructure, long-term planning, and putting investment where people want to go and really making a plan rather than just piecemeal things. I think it really illustrates how important those infrastructure decisions are.
When we come back after these messages, independent expenditure groups.
NC-SPEN will return after these messages.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
ncanimalag.com. The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
Where do you go when you need to know? A&C makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? A&C members can tell you. Just use the A&C member directory as your guide or call us directly. A&C members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
We now return to NC Spin.
Months before the 2014 primaries, we've already seen more than $4 million spent on the U.S. Senate campaign by independent outside expenditure groups. The 2014 elections will feature the Senate race, all 14 congressional seats, 4 of the 7 Supreme Court seats, 3 of the 15 Court of Appeal seats, and all 170 of our legislative seats. Brad, you said in a recent interview these independent expenditure groups will likely have more influence on the outcomes than the traditional political parties, their caucuses, even the candidates. Explain why you said this and whether you think it's good or bad.
Well, we're seeing shifting sands in the political climate and the political arena in the state, and it's impacting the dollars. You know, the Democrats basically built a caucus operation on the Senate side and on the House side that was unparalleled by any caucus operation in the state. With the change in power, you're seeing that change, and what is interesting, you're seeing a concentration of dollars going into the majority party's caucus operations. But you're also seeing a continuation of independent expenditures and 527s to help propagate the majority operations. So it's really changing the dynamics for the minority party and for Democrats who are having to run for legislative office.
I thought it was interesting, Chris. Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest spoke this past week up in Asheville and predicted that the GOP Senate primary will come down to a runoff, and he further said that it was going to be among good friends and that it was going to be a positive campaign. Now, can he sell that?
No, I'm not sure there'll be a runoff, but if there is one, I don't think it'll be very positive. I think we'll see this heat up as it gets closer because I think the Republicans do believe Kay Hagan's vulnerable. I wanted to jump in on one thing you asked the first question. Is it good, all these independent expenditures? And I think the answer is a resounding no for a couple reasons, not just big money, but because we don't know where the money's coming from. When people give to the House Democratic Caucus or the Republican Party or the Republican Caucus, those are all itemized. We know who those people are. Not only the bill that restricted voting rights this year and added voter ID to the law actually made it easier for people to give money without knowing who they are to people that are going to be influencing our elections. I think that's outrageous.
John, how are these independent expenditure groups going to affect the congressional campaigns? I know that, for instance, the Tea Party has already said that Robert Pittenger was their #1 target. What kind of impact do you think they're going to have, not just the Tea Party, but
that left winger?
Yeah, I mean, here's the problem with the Tea Party folks said. Who? The vast majority of conservatives and Tea Party activists in Robert Pittenger's district are going to vote for Robert Pittenger. This is not going to be a serious challenge. But there is going to be significant independent expenditures that will play in the Senate race and perhaps even in that Mike McIntyre-David Rouser rematch in the 7th Congressional District. I don't like the trend either, but for perhaps a different reason from Chris's. I really think it would be better. I don't think you could ever get rid of large amounts of money getting into politics. It has been true. It will be true. As long as the government taxes and regulates and subsidizes and protects and spends, people will care about the outcome. It would be better if that money was flowing to political parties. It would be better if that money could even flow to campaigns directly, so campaigns can be held responsible for and make decisions about it. Instead, these independent expenditure groups, and both sides are doing this aggressively, are moving away from having the candidates and campaigns and parties themselves in charge of politics. I think that creates inefficiencies in the system, and I think it creates a mismatch between what voters want to know and what they're getting.
Well, not only that, Becki, but most any time you get these independent expenditure groups involved, you're going to have a negative campaign. I mean, they do.
Excuse me. They do tend. Excuse me. They do tend to deliver the negative message, which many candidates like that. They don't have to go negative. The 527s and the independent expenditures do that for them. So yeah, you're correct. I think it does lend to a real negative.
And you lose control of the campaign.
Brad,
the candidates do.
You're a political consultant. Looking at your crystal ball, is 2014 going to be a good year for Republicans or a good year for Democrats?
Well, I think it'll be a push. I think the Democrats at the state level are going to have a very good year. They won't take control of the General Assembly, but I think they'll make significant gains in the House, maybe slightly less, 2 or 3 seats in the state Senate. I think Democrats will have a good year. The national level, not so much.
The big question is what's going to happen to the independents and the unaffiliateds? The polls right now show they ain't very happy with what's going on. How they going to swing in 2014? John, any idea?
I think 2014 would be mostly an event driven by national politics, the Affordable Care Act, reaction to the president. I think it'll be at least a modest Republican year, including in North Carolina.
Becki?
And the economy, I think, is going to be a big part of it. You know, whether people are still concerned about their jobs, and so I think the economy is going to be a big driver.
And the economy cuts both ways. I mean, who gets the credit for North Carolina's unemployment rate going down because it's going down all over the country? Does President Obama get credit nationally because unemployment rate's going down? The stock market's at an all-time high.
Brad, what's going to happen with the independents?
I think the independents. It's a push with the independents, Tom. I think they'll support Democrats at the state level, Republicans at the federal level.
All right. After these messages, we're going to ask our panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch a Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthierNC.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
One of the best parts about our show is when we ask our panelists to tell us something we don't know. They get to choose the topic and sound off on it for a few seconds. So let's ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. The News Observer reported recently on the details that hadn't been released yet of Governor McCrory's new plan to transform economic development from the Commerce Department to a freestanding nonprofit corporation to give out incentives. One of the things they do will be negotiate incentive packages. One of the people they named to the committee, according to the News Observer, is John Lasseter, McCrory's former campaign manager in Charlotte. John Lasseter is also raising anonymous corporate contributions for the Renew North Carolina Foundation that McCrory runs. So think about that. A person raising anonymous money from corporations is also partially in charge of giving corporate incentives to corporations in North Carolina. It's a horrible conflict of interest that somebody needs to do something about.
Brad, tell us something we don't know.
Along the same lines on the economic development plan, I'm continuing to hear plans coming out of the Commerce Department where they are integrating with DOT on looking at economic corridors. And one of the big pushes is going to be looking at the economic corridor along Highway 58, 158, 264, 64 for the northeastern part of the state. And those folks up there have been waiting for a long time to see a real economic plan that is coordinated with the transportation plan. And hopefully,
run through that again. What's the Northeast plan again?
Well, it's basically that he's going to tie an economic development plan back to your major highway corridors and to your infrastructure development. So not only your highways, but as well as your sewer and water and your high tech, your fiber optic cable for internet. So it really is an integrated process of bringing the assets of state government together to put together a plan for job creation.
Becki, tell us something we don't know.
Well, since we sort of seem to have this this theme of incentives, I'll just continue with that. This whole thing about job creation, getting businesses to come to North Carolina, we've seen tax reform this year, making that fairer for all businesses to encourage them to come. Some of the incentives, these carve-outs that we have, are going to be going away at the end of this year. The historical preservation incentive, the incentive for biodiesel production, the incentive for creating renewable fuel facilities, the North Carolina state ports, as well as the film credits that would expire in 2015. But that's a move towards getting rid of these carve-outs, smoothing things out, creating a fair playing field in North Carolina.
John, tell us something we don't know.
We all know that North Carolina's major newspapers have been losing print circulation for years, but the argument has been, and the reality has been until recently, that online readership has been growing at the same time, so they still have the same number of readers or more. That's not true anymore. They're losing readers, including online, in the last 2 years by a significant percentage.
Wow. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.